It is 5/3/2024, and I'm here again with.
My name is Jeremiah O'Brien, Jeremiah, and making this video with Justin.
And when did you start diving for abalone? I know you started here and you got here in '80, and you went fishing your first season. When did you start diving for abalone?
Okay, so there's two parts to that. So I didn't start diving for abalone until 1991, and but I started working in the abalone business in 1982. I think it was 82.
And what were you doing with
Well,
that?
so how I started in the business to begin with was I was a deckhand for Mike Radden for about 3 years. Might have been 4 years. And Mike was one of the primary abalone divers in on the whole West Coast here, actually. And his dad was a very well-known diver who was the founder of the Radden Boat Company, which was the standard, the gold standard, if you will, for dive vessels. Um, so, yeah, Mike and his dad were the two divers in the family. And so I worked with Mike, very fortunate. He was a great diver, super diver, and worked with him. And anything that I learned actually about diving would be attributed to Mike.
And was it just you two on his boat?
Yes, yeah. He never worked with another diver. It was always just the two of us. And he was truly an amazing diver. And after I started diving and got into it for a while, and I realized how long and hard and how much ground he covered, he was truly a great diver. So, anyway, that's so then working with him till 1985. And then I had another boat and was out of the dive business until 1990. So there was a 5-year skip. And we get back into the dive business in 1990, and we spent the next 6 years operating in the dive business.
So was it you and Mike again, or was it you?
No, it was myself, and it started off myself and a fellow named Randy Can, and we built a boat, the Blue Moon, together. Then after about a year and a half, 2 years, Randy bought me out. So we agreed on a price, and he built another boat. It was exactly the same, but we had twin boats. The only differences were some subtle differences on handrails and just a slight variance in color. You know, if it wasn't your own boat, you wouldn't hardly notice there was a difference, you know. But it was pretty cool.
And where? Go ahead.
And then we fished together. So we ran together. Another friend built a boat exactly like our boats, and so there was 3 of us that basically ran around together for quite a few years.
The clone fleet.
Yeah, we were called the clone fleet or the clone boats. Yeah, and it was pretty cool.
And where would you go out to dive? Is that be down south to Channel Islands or around here in
We worked from, we did a lot of work, a lot up north in the Point Arena area, north and south of Point Arena, down, oh boy, from Tamales Bay to Fort Bragg was the zone. And we worked primarily out of Point Arena, a little bit out of Bodega Bay. Um, now that was the north end, and then down south we worked out of Santa Barbara and worked the upper Channel Islands, and then worked out of LA, Long Beach, and we worked the Southern Islands, being primarily San Clemente Island, primarily. Some of the guys went to over to San Nicolas Island now and again, or Santa Barbara Island or something, but primarily we worked at San Clemente Island.
Was there quite a lot of other boats in the area as well while you were diving?
Yes, yeah. There was so down there at first we were doing urchins and abalone. So when there was dive boats present, some were doing abalone and some were doing urchins. So there'd be there was a strong presence of dive boats back in those days. Yeah, almost no matter where you went, there was money in it. And so, needless to say, I mean, it's like any business in the world. It attracts interest when there's money involved. The money back then was very good in both fisheries.
And were you specifically diving for abalone, or did you
Both.
do both?
Okay. Did both, yeah. And yeah, we did both.
Did you ever catch live at all? If that was a thing, like keep them alive in well tanks.
Oh, that's what we did. Yeah, everything we delivered in the dive business was alive. Everything, yeah, for sure. If abalones or urchins, either one are dead, they're not really. They don't have a lot of value. When an urchin dies, they actually begin to melt internally, not externally, of course, because they're made of silica. But internally, they go through a meltdown, and the roe and the sperm will literally melt. So it has no value. Consequently, everything has to come in alive. Abalone the same way.
And can you describe the kind of gear you were using back then? Were you still using like airlines or at all? Or were you using tanks or free diving?
Yeah, well, so tanks are illegal in our business, either urchins or abalone. You must have surface supplied air, which was on a hose, and our setups were called hookup setups. That's the official name to differentiate it from scuba. Scuba is compressed air in a tank. Hookah is surface supplied air through a hose to the diver. Our gear was super minimal. The gear we wore was super minimal. Yeah, the gear we used was minimal, and I kind of smile when I say that because the gear prior to our type of gear was very bulky, cumbersome, and difficult to work with and dangerous. So our gear took a lot of the dangers out. Still, I mean, it's inherently dangerous, but took a lot of the dangers away, which was good, and was certainly not bulky or cumbersome. So we just had a suit. Our suits used to be, most of us now had two companies. Primarily we dealt with Don Duckett out of Santa Barbara and M&M out of Long Beach. And both of the people who made the suits were named Don, but they both made incredible suits. So that was your suit was your primary piece of gear.
How thick were they?
suits went through an evolution. So they started off mostly being about a 1/4 inch. And then they went from that to 3/8 on the torso, 3/8 on the pants, and 1/4 inch on the sleeves. And then as time went on, and we, particularly with the advent of the North Coast diving for urchins, where the water is considerably colder than down here, we went to, I believe in 91, we had Don Duckett start building 1/2 inch suits. And anybody who's been in wetsuits and everything knows that the thickness of the suit has a lot to do with the motion of the man. So we had our pants came up to our chest, to here, and they were 1/2 inch. And our tunic came down over us, and that was 1/2 inch. And so we had 1 inch of rubber on our chest. So it was, what I want to say, confining. Yeah, it was confining. But being a little bit warmer was worth it. Because the water up there was cold. It was really cold. We were diving, and sometimes, I think the coldest I remember up there was 41. So it's only 9 degrees above freezing. And when it's all over your body, it keeps you awake. Anyway, so that was the suit. And then the rest of the gear was like super, super basic. Even our tools were basic. If we were diving for abalone, we had an abalone iron, and that was made of the leaf spring of a vehicle. Old pickup trucks were some of the primary leaf springs that we sought out. And
you shaped it yourself? You cut
and it was all cut, yeah, you'd do all your own. Actually, a friend of mine made them for me, and it was a gift, so it was a very nice present. And in our urchin rakes, I had made urchin rakes and bought them, made them. You could buy an urchin rake, not so much the abalone iron, but you could buy an urchin, and you'd buy it from another diver. So other divers would make rakes and sell them to other divers.
Could you describe the iron? Was that one of those like little
I've
knives?
got some. Would you like me to get them? And you could get them in your picture.
Oh, sure.
Me to. So this is some of the gear that we used in both the abalone and the urchin fishery. First of all, this was used, of course, in both fisheries, but this was attached, so we had our weight belt. I've already described the wetsuit, so now you can picture we've got the wetsuit on, and we've got our weight belt coming around here. I wore about 30 pounds of weight, so actually between 30 and 35 pounds, depending on the depth of water. And somebody listening to this might be going, holy shit, that's a lot of weight. But please remember that we have a 1 inch wetsuit on. So not only are you trying to swim to the bottom, but you're trying to swim to the bottom with 1 inch around your torso and back, and a 1/2 inch around the rest of your body of flotation. Wetsuits full of air, that's what keeps you warm. That's the insulating factor. So it's buoyant. So it took 30, 35 pounds to get down and stay down without having to work hard at it. But anyway, so we get the weight belt on. This hooked up to the weight belt. So this plugged into our hose going to the boat. So that's the primary air. plugs into our hose. This little snap here attaches to our D-ring on our weight belt. So we get a D-ring on the weight belt, and this attaches to it. It lets go with just a pull of this pin. And that pops open, so if you want to divest, you can divest quick. Next was the regulator, and this is, we used mostly just regular old regulators. This is a C Sport. My favorite is around here somewhere was a Kirby Morgan, that are just a very cool, well-made product, local to Santa Barbara. Then the last, but very important, and this was called, so this is a utility air deal. We called it a donkey dick. So, but that's what we call it. Everybody knew what you meant if you said that. So what this is auxiliary air supply, and we used it to fill our float bags and to various other tasks and so forth, but primarily to fill your float bags to be able to swim what you were harvesting to the surface.
So you would put the abalone or urchins in this bag, fill it with air, and then it would come to the surface, and the crew member on the top, on the surface, would collect that.
Yes, absolutely. We would follow the bags up to the surface. The crew would throw us a line with a hook on it. We would hook it to a bridle at the top of the bag, and he would just winch it. It went winched up on a davit, swung into the boat, and he landed in the boat. At that time, he would throw, if we were going to go back down to keep harvesting, he would throw us another bag, and we'd catch it and just go back down, go to work. Yeah. So some of the other tools, let's do the abalone. So there's two. They're pretty rusty now. You can tell they've been not working for a while. But there's two abalone irons here. So this one stayed on the boat. So this was the boat iron. This one came to the bottom and was used as my tool to harvest with. This was a knife right here, and it was sharpened. I don't know how well you can see that, but it was sharpened so that we could cut kelp with it. So as we were swimming through various kelp beds, you'd be weaving your way through, and the tension of the kelp getting stuck on your hose became a problem. So this was sharpened, and we'd be able to use it much like a person would use a machete. And also, for what it's made for, is to pop the abalones off structure. Now the reason this stays on the boat is because we have a size limit for abalone. The size limit was enforced by all wardens to the ultimate degree. You did not want to have an abalone that was short. So this bar, which I had on the bottom all the time, would be used. This we didn't, all the things I told you we used it for. Well, we also flipped it around like this and used it to climb reefs with. I mean, this thing took abuse. This was a well-used tool, and this was our whole toolbox, so we used it for everything. Now, because that would change that would create a change between these 2 points. Tiny change. But you didn't want any change because you would get a big fat ticket. So this stayed on the boat and was not thrown around, kicked around. It was treated gently so that this distance never changed. This was called a plug. And this device fits perfectly in between. It's all tied up here now, so I can't really do it. But this fits perfectly in between these 2 points. And even though, so this, you can imagine how bad they were checking us, because we had this that we never abused to make sure it was the right distance. And then we had this just to check to make sure it was the right distance. And we checked all the time, so we were nervous. You did not want to get busted.
What was the typical fine that happens if you?
Well, you know, besides the fine, so the fine probably it varies. Probably a minimum, and this is back then, $1,000 an animal. Now that's a minimum back then. I have no idea what it would be now. It's closed now, so it doesn't matter. It's moved, but that was a lot of money back then, a lot. And the bad part was it often came with a license suspension. Now that was the killer. So if you got a 3-month suspension, well, that means go home. Pay your rent for the next 3 months without a job. That type of thing. So it was not good, period. If you did get a ticket like that, besides all of that, you could not then sell or buy any permit in the fisheries for 5 years. All of these things went with one ticket. And in our business, anything like that could disrupt your business to the point that you would have to find a new living.
Did you ever get a ticket or
No.
know anyone that got a ticket?
Known lots of guys who had tickets. Yeah, lots of guys. And I never had one. I've been lucky, fortunate, but most fishermen, most all fishermen, don't do things that would get them a ticket. And I say that primarily because again, the cost is just too much. If you're a real fisherman, you're very, very, very careful about how you treat your licenses and your permits. They're expensive and it's your livelihood. If you lose any of those things, you're out of business.
And how would the Fish and Game check? Would they go through every single one? Would they board occasionally and check?
Sometimes they would go through almost everyone. They could, of course, with abalones, they go through everyone. Sorry. With urchins, of course, we're delivering generally thousands of pounds so that they would not necessarily go through everyone. But yeah, with abalones, absolutely, every single one. Yeah, of course, we're usually talking about 7 or 8, 10 dozen or something like that, you know. But anyways, so that was the tools, and I don't, let's see. No. I was hoping to find an abalone bag. I know I've got an abalone bag here. So a couple more things that we used down on the bottom were, so this is an ab bag. This is an ab bag, and this would hold quite a few dozen. Doesn't look, you wouldn't think so, but when you start putting abalone in it, this starts pooching out, and the whole thing will just turn into a big bowl when it's full. Then we get a ring up here, and on that ring we would hook a bag. This is our float bag, like this. We'd also have a flashlight, probably clipped on there too, if you are using it. So the float bag is just held on with like this. So when this is full, or when it's getting filled and becomes heavy and cumbersome to be swimming around, then you would open your float bag like this, put your, where is it? Put your donkey, whatever, and fill it up with air, like this. This would fill and hold this, so you would fill the bag. This was a really good bag. You could adjust the flow on this bag with this spring that goes to a valve, so you could release air. This was really cool because when you were ascending, your bag is actually filling up because the air in your bag is compressed to the atmosphere that you're in on the bottom. And as you go up, you are exiting atmospheres. So as you do, this is swelling and going up faster, to which point, if you don't adjust the air, then it will get away from you and usually comes out of the water really hard, this high, and falls over, and all the air comes out, and then it comes right back down bottom again. So you have to swim back up, and whatever. But that's the bag and the float, anyway. The urchins, I don't have any urchin bags left because I sold them all to an urchin diver out of Fort Bragg. Tom, guy named Tom up in Fort Bragg. And good diver, he's been in the business a long, long time. But the urchin bag was the same as I just showed you with the ab bag, but bigger. Our urchin bags, our ring bags held about 450 pounds, and they were the ones that we used primarily. And they were about, well stuffed, they were about 450 pounds a piece. We had various, so we had baskets and bags and so forth, but primarily the same. Ring bag, float, they went up and down the same way. So I think that's all the tools, you know. Oh, shoot. I did the abalone. Now we got the urchins. So with the urchins, yeah, there was less tools with the urchins. With the abs, we carried, as I said, a flashlight, ab iron. Actually, sometimes we carried 2 irons. Sometimes, especially when we were using the flashlight, we would carry a long iron and the flashlight, and if you would go underneath ledges down on the bottom, and sometimes crawl underneath. In some cases, having to take your regulator out and crawl underneath, because sometimes these ledges went back 10, 12 feet, and the abalones would get way in the back there, and you'd have to crawl back and get them out with the flashlight. It was very dark, and a long iron. So, sea urchins. It was a super animal in the 90s. In 92, I believe, one of those years, give or take, we were the biggest fishery in the state of California in both size and poundage and money. So I believe that year we had 44 million pounds come across the dock of sea urchins. We sold almost everything we harvested back then to Japan. It was very lucrative. And we stayed with that. One of the reasons that, one of the many reasons that the urchins slowed down in California is because Japan went into a terrible recession and many other countries started harvesting urchins. Other countries and states and so forth within our own country. So Japan was being inundated with urchins at a time when their money was going south. So urchins kind of, it just became not worth the financial effort or not worth the risk that we took on a daily basis. To just became not worth it. This was what we call an urchin rake. Super simple tool. Super simple. So when we either made these or bought them from other divers. So these were made by divers, and a guy would make 4 or 5 of them down in his shop, and he'd keep one for himself and sell the other 3. So this is just stainless steel rod. This was actually a piece of our air hose. So it was the same size as our air hose, just cut a piece of your air hose off and use a bandit tool. These are bandits. These were another thing that we used primarily as opposed to on the beach or something you'd use hose clamps. Well, hose clamps are okay and they even work to a point, but these are reliable. Your life is being risked on, not necessarily here, but when they're on our hose. So hose clamps just don't, it's not something you want to risk your life. Anyways, that's the bandits. Oh, so this down here is also, like I showed on the abalone iron, this has been sharpened on both sides to act as a knife. The points in the middle here are, this is made to size a purple sea urchin, a red, not a red sea urchin. This is the size of the test. So you stick this, protrudes because you must stick this past the spines to get the true measurement of his test or his body. And yeah, these were super tools. And you got used to using these, and it was just like an extension of your own arm. It was great for punching sea lions who were trying to pull your mask off and stuff like that. Anything that was aggressive, this was how you were aggressive back. And it has a long reach, and it worked really good. Super tool.
And did you encounter quite a lot of hostile wildlife down there when you were diving?
Let's see, hostile. Hostile is probably not the right word. Sea lions generally are trying to play, but they don't know what we're doing, and they don't even know who we are. So they don't realize when they're trying to play by pulling our hose out of our air out of our mouth or our mask off of our face, that we're not playing anymore, So you don't hurt them, but you just give them a good shot in the ribs, and they don't leave. They'll stay around and still kind of play, but they'll usually do it at a distance and not come too close. But for the most part, no, there's nothing really hostile down there for anybody to be aware of. All the sharks and stuff is, way better chance of falling out of bed and hurting yourself badly than getting bit by a shark. So it's something that honestly is not even a thought. You don't. Somebody could be talking. You could be talking about sharks all day, but when you're working down there, it's just out of thought.
Yeah,
If,
thanks.
I think if you were the type of person who's going to think about that, you wouldn't be able to go to work. So it's just, yeah. And the reality, getting into, I don't know how deep you want to get into that part of it, but the thing with the sharks, we lost a really dear friend, super guy. Can't say enough about Jimmy Robinson, one of the greatest guys anybody ever meet. And Jimmy, he was lost Castle Rock, San Miguel Island, and it's just a bad deal. But we've had a few other guys, probably half a dozen others bit, but not killed. Jimmy was the fatality. So when you think about the tens and tens of thousands of hours divers put in the water, tens of thousands of hours, to lose one man is hardly, hardly enough to scare me. I mean, so it's not a factor. The chances become abysmal.
Thanks for the demonstration.
Yeah. So earlier I had said that we were not allowed to use tanks. So we could only work on a hose. But we did have tanks on the boat, and we would what we called survey with tanks. The reason is we could get away from the boat. So if I was going to survey with tanks, and what surveying meant was, so you go out, you're out in the ocean, and you go to a place you think might be a good place to work, to dive in, but you don't know, of course, because you don't know till you go to the bottom and see what you've got. And all areas don't have abalones and urchins. You've got to hit the right spot. So we would go down with a tank and a scooter. So a scooter was about 3 feet long. Our scooter, there's different types of scooters. Ours is about 3 feet long, and you straddled it or just held it to your chest. It had a throttle, and you steered it with your body, and it was pretty powerful. And it lasted a fair amount of time. We had spare batteries, so we could stay down for a couple hours changing batteries out, looking for a good spot to work. When we found a good spot, you'd take a buoy, they're called pelican buoys, would tie it off to a piece of kelp or a rock or whatever would hold it on the bottom, release the buoy, and it would float to the surface and mark the spot. Sometimes you would swim and maybe release 2 or 3, 4 buoys before you went back to the boat. It was the diver's determination: is this enough for all of us to start, or is this enough for me to start? So you might buoy off 2 or 3 places. So we had the scooter and with the tank, so that was used. It was super tool. That scooter was it was pretty cool. I used the scooter doing abalone. There's a lot of deep abalone. An area I used to work. So let's see, if I can explain it. An area I used to work, there was a lot of area in 80 and 90 feet that had abalone. And this area had abalone called grazers. And they would get out and literally cruise around, but they loved to get up at the base of big kelp stalks, big holdfasts for the kelp. And they would get around the bottom of that and eat the roots on the holdfast. So being in 80 feet, it was very difficult to get any time down there, swimming from hold fast to hold fast, looking for these animals. So we would use our hose in the scooter. And then we would cruise in about 40 feet, which we have a lot of time in 40 feet. I could be in 40 feet almost all day long. And this is only on clear days now, and be able to look down at the bottom, 40 feet below us, and spot possible abalone. And so when you spotted a couple, you would shoot down, pick them up, and then go back up and maintain your 40 feet. And we'd get a lot of extra time doing that. So,
Drive by.
yeah, drive-bys, yeah, good. But yeah, so that was that.
How much abalone were you bringing in around every trip?
You know, it's really hard to say. I really don't know.
Maybe count by bags, like you were saying. Or
Yeah, we
bags.
counted by the dozen.
A dozen.
You know, we went on dozens. And of course, yeah, God, how many a trip? It varied and changed. It changed with time, and it got lesser with time. So, God, there was times when we'd have like 30 dozen in a day, and then years that was when I was working with Mike, and then when I started, say 10 years later, if you had 15 dozen, you had a good trip, really good trip. So the 30 dozen in some cases would even be for a day. And of course too, Mike was a great diver, had a lot of hot spots, but so, excuse me. So primarily you never knew how many. At the end, I'd say probably 10 dozen was an average per trip. We were getting paid at the end, we were getting $550 a dozen. There was a few times you get a buck or two more, but $550 was, I think, the final number before it was closed.
So it became less and less profitable as it went on.
Well, it became less and less profitable, but the price kept going up and up and up. So the price would cut because they wanted them badly. The price would be compensated. I mean, the lack of abalone would be compensated for the diver by the price. Now, the numbers started falling in the 90s, and the numbers started falling primarily because that was when withering foot syndrome was peaking. And it was able to travel from San Diego all the way up to Point Arena. I don't know how far past Point Arena the disease traveled, but I know it went up to Point Arena. And it decimated the stock. So obviously as they were dying out by the millions, they were becoming less and less harvestable.
So were you diving down and just seeing shells littering the bottom towards the end?
Yeah, in places, yeah. And there was shells, and you know, there was always shells because like every other animal in the world, abalones die, everything has a lifespan, and so there was always a certain amount of shells. But yeah, there was considerably more. There was areas, that there was tons of shells in. I always have one place that sticks in my mind on San Miguel Island in a place called Otters, not far from Castle Rock on the island. There's a borehole, and I went down this particular borehole that was probably 10 feet across in diameter, perfectly round, maybe 8 feet deep. And I have no idea how deep the abalones, the shells on the bottom, were. At least a couple of feet in depth. I got down on my hands and knees and started digging through the shells and never found the bottom. Never found sand. I could have, I'm sure, if I moved everything, but I wasn't going to spend that much time. And I did find in that area, so I figured, seeing all these dead abalones, very sad thing, they were all black abalone. Right on the beach, which is where you'd find the blacks. And I did find about a dozen, maybe 18, alive, stuck in one corner, all clumped up together. And hopefully, those abalone were able to repopulate that area. Hopefully they were immune to the disease, but it was obvious the disease had wiped everything else out.
And switching gears here, when you came back to Morro Bay, were you selling it here on the docks individually, by the dozen, to processors? Was there still one? I think there was one off the pier in Cayucas at one point.
Yeah, we
around?
sold them down there in the 80s. In the 90s, let's see, so we sold them down there in the 80s, and we did sell here in Morro Bay. Yeah, so yeah, we sold here in Morro Bay and Cayucas, and that was in the 80s. In the 90s, we didn't, let's see, no, we did sell a few in the in the 90s. Eddie Pierce started a company here in the 90s, the Pierce. He's a member of the Pierce family here in town and Santa Barbara. Family's very famous and well known in the abalone industry. Very well known. And Eddie started a processing plant here. Yeah. So we sold to Ed. Everybody had their own buyers too, and we had a buyer. His name was Francois, French gentleman, obviously, right from France. And we used to sell to him. He was our primary abalone buyer. He would come to Santa Barbara, he would come to LA, wherever we happened to be, he would drive and pick them up. He sold the abalones all around the world. So one of the markets he had us get some green abalone for him. They were going to Israel. He sold abalone to Japan, Israel, and Europe. And he's a good buyer. We stuck with him. And yeah, a lot of people will find a single buyer and stay with him. A lot of people will just buy to whoever's got the best price at the time, you know.
And when you got out of the business, or when did you get out of the business? And when you did, was that at the end when they banned commercial diving, or is that, did you stop and then people continued to dive?
No, we worked till the very bitter end. Matter of fact, we have pictures of the very last day of abalone diving. And actually the pictures turned up in a magazine, historic magazine that we have here. And so it's a picture of Trudy and myself bringing some of the last abalones, or the last, aboard for all intents and purposes on the last day. Yeah, so we were there to the very bitter end.
What were some of your favorite spots to go out to dive? Or I guess like favorite, or did you have a favorite, you know, depth to go at or species to go for?
No, you know, boy, I loved diving, as did most all of the divers. We just appreciated and knew what we had and loved it. And as far as they, all the places were good places, but obviously, you know, you got places that you prefer. San Miguel Island was one of the great places I love to dive, because as you moved around the island diving, every area was totally different topography. So you had hills and reefs and rock piles and sandy areas and shelf. It just had a wide assortment of pretty cool structure. Santa Clemente Island was another fun place to dive, because you never knew what you were going to see. San Clemente Island is littered with ordnance, missile, every kind of missile you can think of, rockets, missiles. I found a jet plane. So, and the bottom is pretty exciting. It's a cool bottom with a lot of variation, and you never knew what you were going to find. That was a lot of fun to dive there.
Any specific fun memories stick out to you, or you know, personal bests of either an urchin or an abalone, or something funny happened down there? Any good memories?
Oh boy. Yeah, I got really badly bent there, and I paralyzed my head, lost 100% of my hearing in 1 year. Lost it all for about 3 weeks. Doctor was able to get it back through medication and so forth. It was pretty interesting. When we were driving down the street, it was my right ear. So my wife would be in the passenger side talking to me, and it's amazing how directional our ears are. So you can hear nothing when you lose 100% in that ear when somebody's sitting next to you talking. Nothing. Zero. So, yeah, I was lucky to get it back. That was a different story, but yeah, there's, you know, every place has a lot of great stories. There was so many, it's hard to just bring one up, but yeah.
That jet plane, was that a complete
It was
complete
broken
jet?
up pretty good. So when I dove down, I dove directly on the tail section. The tail section was there, and the plane had broken in half. You know, to be honest with you, I don't remember if the wings were there. What I was interested in is I wanted the canopy, but of course, hopefully the canopy was gone when the pilot ejected, and again, I hope he ejected. But I was looking for that goddamn canopy. I never found it, of course. But there was hundreds of miles of hydraulic hose. Looked much like a brake hose. A brake hose is hydraulic hose, so I'm sure that's probably what it was. And wires and hydraulic hoses all over the place. And I never found the front of the plane. But what I did find was a thruster. I assume it was a thruster. Looked like, not that I know what I'm talking about. And I floated it up to the boat. It was about 6 feet long, about 10 inches in diameter. It's made of titanium or some metal like that. and round, long, round, cylindrical. And we had it on the boat. I'd tie it down to the cleats, and of course it would still bang, and my wife went nuts. And so she informed me that when we get back to the beach, one of the items, either that cylinder or her, would not be on the boat. And I had my choice of which one I wanted to go. So I threw the cylinder over, but not before inside of the cylinder was a smaller thruster of some sort, whatever it was. And I've got that today. It's out in the garden. But I didn't leave completely empty-handed. So that was cool. But yeah, I still got it outside. If you want to take a picture. Matter of fact, I got a howitzer shell out there, and that came off the bottom. Pretty neat. Still, when I picked up the howitzer shell, it still had the timer on the nose of it, but it's since corroded away. But did you want a picture of those?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you speak very fondly of your experiences, and
Oh,
I hope someday it will open again.
I hope so too, for all of the people coming behind us, you know. Yeah, we knew in no uncertain terms how fortunate we were. Nobody, I don't think, ever abused that. If people were abusive, the people in the industry around them wouldn't stand for it. Abusive meaning, you know, throwing trash around or doing anything to damage the beautiful place that we got to work in. We absolutely knew how fortunate we were, and so we cherished every moment. With talk, that was half of the conversation at dinner, was how fortunate we were all the time. It was one of the jobs that you dream about, you know. Yeah, very lucky.
Well, thanks for speaking with me again, Jeremiah.
Yeah, you bet, Justin. Always a pleasure.